Okay, let's read the rest of Chapter 4, The Rulers of Terabithia. Remember yesterday? They kind of found a place where they wanted to build their castle. A few days after they finished the castle, Janice Avery fell down in the school bus and yelled that Jess had tripped her when she went past. See, she made such a fuss that Mrs. Prentice, the driver, ordered Jess off the bus and he had to walk 3 miles home. When Jess finally got to Terabithia, Leslie was huddled next to one of the cracks below the roof, trying to get enough light to read. There was a picture on the cover which showed a killer whale attacking a dolphin. "What are you doing?" He came in and sat beside her on the ground. "Reading. I had to do something." That girl, her anger came. "It doesn't matter. I don't mind walking all that much." What was a little height compared to what Janice Avery might have chosen to do? "It's the principle of the thing," Jess said. "That's what you've got to understand. You have to stop people like that. Otherwise, they turn into tyrants and dictators." He reached over and took the whale book from her hands, pretending to study the picture. "Got any good ideas?" "What? I thought you were getting some ideas on how to stop Janice Avery." "No, we're trying to save the whales. They might become extinct." He gave her the book back. "You save the whales and shoot people, huh?" She grinned finally. "Something like that, I guess. Say, did you ever hear the story about Moby Dick?" "Who's that?" Here they are, looking at the book. So that's Leslie and Jess. "Well, there was once a huge white whale named Moby Dick, and Leslie began to spin out a wonderful story about the whale and the crazy sea captain who wanted to kill it. There ought to be a way of making the whale shimmering white against the dark water." Okay, next section. At first, they avoided each other during school hours, but by October, they grew careless about their friendship. Gary Fulcher, like Brenda, took great pleasure in teasing Jess about his girlfriend. It hardly bothered Jess. He knew that a girlfriend was someone who chased you on the playground and tried to grab you and kiss you. He could no more imagine Leslie chasing a boy than he could imagine Miss Doublechin Myers shimming up a flagpole. Gary Fulcher could go and you know where. There was really no free time at school except recess, and now that there were no races, Jess and Leslie usually looked for a quiet place on the field and sat and talked. Except for the magic half hour on Fridays, recess was all that Jess looked forward to at school. Leslie could always come up with something funny that made the long days bearable. Often the joke was on Mrs. Myers. Leslie was one of those people who sat quietly at her desk, never whispering or daydreaming or chewing gum, doing beautiful schoolwork, and yet her brain was so full of mischief that if the teacher could have once seen through the mask of perfection, she would have thrown her out. Jess could hardly keep a straight face in class, just trying to imagine what might be going on behind that angelic look of Leslie's. One whole morning, as Leslie had related it at recess, she spent imagining Miss Myers on one of those farms down in Arizona. Miss Myers was a little fat. She loved food. And Leslie thought about her going to a camp to lose weight and become skinny. "Jessie Aarons," the teacher's sharp voice punctured his daydream. He couldn't look Miss Myers straight in her little pudgy face. He cracked up. He set his sight on her uneven hemline. "Yes'm?" "Yes, ma'am." He was going to have to get coaching from Leslie. Miss Myers always caught him when his mind was wandering, and she never seemed to suspect Leslie of not paying attention. He sneaked a glance that way. Leslie was totally absorbed in her geography book, so it would appear to anyone who didn't know she was really pretending. Terabithia was cold in November. They didn't dare build a fire in the castle, though sometimes they would build one outside and huddle around it. For a while, Leslie had been able to keep 2 sleeping bags in the castle, but around the 1st of December, her father noticed they were gone and she had to take them back. Actually, Jess made her take them back. It was not that he was afraid of the birds exactly. Leslie's parents were young, with straight white teeth and lots of hair, both of them. Leslie called them Judy and Bill, not Mom and Dad, which bothered Jess a little more than he wanted to admit. It was none of his business what Leslie called her parents, but he just couldn't get used to it. Both of the Burkes were writers. Mrs. Burke wrote novels, and according to Leslie, was more famous than Mr. Burke, who wrote about politics. It was really something to see the shelf that had their books on it. Mrs. Burke was Judith Hancock on the cover, which threw you at first, but then if you looked at the back and saw her picture, you could see she was young and serious. Mr. Burke was going back and forth to Washington to finish a book he was working on with someone else, but he promised Leslie that after Christmas he would stay home and fix up the house and plant a garden and listen to music and only write in his spare time. They didn't look like Jesse's idea of rich, but even he could tell that the jeans they wore had not come off the counter at Newberry's. There was no TV at the Burkes, but there were mountains of records and a stereo that looks like something out of Star Trek. And although their car was small and dusty, it was an Italian and it looked expensive too. They were always nice to Jess whenever he went over, but then they would suddenly begin talking French politics or string quartets or how... That's my doggy barking. Or how to save the Timberwolves or the whales. He wasn't comfortable having Leslie at his house either. Joyce Ann would stare, her index finger pulling down her mouth and making her drool. Brenda and Ellie always managed to remark about girlfriend. His mother acted stiff and funny, just the way she did when she had to go up to the school about something. Later, she would refer to Leslie's tacky clothes. Leslie always wore pants, even to school. Her hair was shorter than the boys. Her parents were hardly more than hippies. Maybelle either tried to push in with him and Leslie or sulked about being left out. His father had seen Leslie only a few times and had nodded to show that he had noticed her, but his mother said that she was sure he was fretting that his only son did nothing but play with girls, and they were both worried about what would become of it. Jess didn't concern himself with what would become of it. For the first time in his life, he got up every morning with something to look forward to. Leslie was more than his friend. She was the other, more exciting self, his way to Terabithia and the world beyond. Terabithia was their secret, which was a good thing, for how could Jess explain it to an outsider? Just walking down the hill towards the woods made something warm and made him feel warm inside. The closer he came to the dry creek bed and the crabapple tree rope, the more he could feel the beating of his heart. He grabbed the end of the rope and swung out toward the other side with a kind of wild exhilaration and landed on his feet, taller and stronger and wiser in their mysterious land. Leslie's favorite place besides the castle was the pine forest. There the trees grew so thick at the top that the sunshine was veiled. No low bush or grass could grow in that dim light, so the ground was carpeted with golden needles. I used to think this place was haunted, Jess confessed to Leslie one afternoon. Oh, but it is, she said. But you don't have to be scared. It's not haunted with evil things. How do you know? You could just feel it. Listen. At first, he heard only stillness. It was the stillness that he was always frightened of before, but this time it was like a moment after Miss Edmonds finished a song, just after the chords hummed down to silence. Leslie was right. They stood there, not moving. They didn't hear anything. Far away, they could hear geese heading south. Leslie took a deep breath. This is not an ordinary place, she whispered. Even the rulers of Terabithia come into it only at times of greatest sorrow or greatest joy. We must strive to keep it sacred. It would not do to disturb the spirits. He nodded, and without speaking, they went back to the creek where they shared together a meal of crackers and dried fruit. And that's the end of chapter 4. We'll start chapter 5, the giant killers, another time.